very lovely to welcome you to Waterford Writers Weekend and to Greyfriars, which is one of my favourite venues in the Lord weekend here. It's an amazing weekend. It's organised by the Library Service and they do a fantastic job. And as I was saying the other night at the Sean Dunn Awards, really libraries are all about giving people access to books and so much more. And the festival itself gives you then access, one step on, it gives you access to authors and to find out exactly what makes them tick, whether they're fiction, non-fiction or whatever. So my name is Vanessa O'Loughlin and I run a website called writing.ie and a publishing consultancy called Inkwell, and I'm also the chair of Irish Pen, so I do a few bits and pieces. But we're joined today by a fantastic author called Jane Casey, who is an Irish author but who lives in London. She was born in Dublin and she read English at Jesus College, Oxford. She is a very clever lady. Her first book, The Missing, was published by EU Press in February 2010 and won the Best Debut Fiction category in the Crime Zone Thriller Awards in 2011. It was also shortlisted for the Irish Crime Book of the Year, and it was quickly followed by The Burning, The Reckoning and The Last Girl. And her last book, The Stranger You Know, which came out last year, absolutely had me captivated. I took it on holiday with me and I couldn't put it down. So it's a fantastic book, highly recommend it to anybody who enjoys crime and enjoys a really good twist, because there's a few things in that book that you will not see coming. And this year it's going to be published in the States, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And her next book is The Kill.
The Kill.
The Kill.
Coming out in June. I started reading crime fiction when I was very young. So my first grown-up books were Agatha Christie's and more of that sort of thing. And when I was at Oxford and was supposed to be being very intellectual, I was actually sitting in the Bodleian Library, which is this amazing library in the middle of Oxford, reading Elizabeth George novels when I was supposed to be reading Anglo-Saxon stuff. So that didn't go so well. But it was very valuable training for me. And then I worked as a children's books editor. And over the course of time, a story occurred to me, which was about a little boy going missing. It had nothing to do with what I was working on, but the fact was I was working all day on fluffy bunny stories and then going home and writing about murdering children. So I don't know if the two things were connected. I don't think they were.
Very well.
But it was a story that just really wouldn't leave me alone. And it took me a long time to realise that you should write the books that you want to read yourself. Not the books that you think will hit the market or anything else like that, but the ones that you just can't stand not to see in the world.
That's really, really good advice, because I mean, obviously one of the things that a lot of new writers think when they start writing is that they maybe should follow the trend or whatever, but it takes about a year to write a book, and it takes at least a year for that book then to hit the shelf, assuming you get a contract immediately, about a year for that book to hit the shelf. So generally speaking, that's a 2-year process, and the trends that you're trying to follow we went through years, I think. So anybody who's wanting to write vampires at the moment, trying to follow the vampire trend, that's really gone, hasn't it? Yeah, there's a few like that.
Unless you really care about vampires, if you absolutely love them and that's all you can think about, then write the vampire story, who knows?
And make it original and different.
The first book was a standalone, which is about this boy who went missing and his sister.
Oh yeah.
Her kind of experience of growing up with this kind of shadow hanging over her. But it was very different, and it did very well. And I came up with a follow-up, and showed my editor the synopsis, because that's generally the process, that you write the synopsis and it goes off to the editor and they say, well done. She didn't. She said, could you not write that book, please? Which was slightly devastating. It was, and I still think of that book and wish I had got to write it, maybe one day. But she said, go away and think of a series character. And that series character was Maeve Kerrigan. She is a detective constable, so she's basically the lowest rung of detective life. She is the daughter of Irish parents who live in London. I'm really interested in how different Ireland and England are, and it was my way of kind of exploring that, because she's somebody who is in every way Irish, except for the fact that she lives in England, has always lived in England, and doesn't have access to kind of the Irish culture that we all kind of take for granted. So she's not one thing or another, and I think an outsider is always a good character to have as your central figure, especially in crime, somebody who's aware of little differences, because they're so conscious of themselves.
Because she's a detective constable, she really is, I suppose, watching everybody and seeing everything going on around her. You know, she's the one that has to make the tea, and she's, does a lot of the running around, but that gives her sort of unique access in its own way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and I think one of the things that I wanted, I think in crime fiction, and I'm sure you will generally, people who like crime read a lot of crime, there's a kind of tradition almost of having a sort of an older central figure, somebody who is maybe an inspector, somebody who is a bit of a maverick, who's not going to go very much further, who doesn't really care, somebody who has nothing to lose. And Maeve, I always think of as being somebody who has everything to lose, because she's at the start of her career, and if she puts a foot wrong now, she could lose everything that she cares about.
But I think that core conflict is absolutely vital in crime, because it's in any novel, it's the conflict that drives the story. And it's, you know, if you've got that basic conflict and then you bring in plot on top of it, then you've got something really quite exciting going on there. And you mentioned there that you were planning to be a serial character. So what was it that you took on board to construct that serial character? And when you're thinking in terms of her age, and you know, what did you have to take on board?
Well, I wanted a character who had a lot ahead of her, basically. I find it really interesting how tough your 20s are when you're trying to establish yourself, and really nothing in your life is settled at that point, and you could go anywhere, you could do anything, but the things that you really want to do are very hard to achieve sometimes. So that was basically my starting point for her. I mean, I think every crime writer has Ian Rankin in the back of their mind, because Ian Rankin, as I'm sure you all know, has a wonderful character called Rebus. But when he started writing him, he wrote a book a year, and he did them, they were relevant to the particular year that he was writing, if that makes sense. So he basically burned through Rebus's career to the point where he had to make him retire, because he had no choice, because he had always followed the chronology of his career in that way. And he admitted he'd made a mistake by tying himself so closely to this chronology and giving himself an end point when he wasn't actually finished with that character. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. You know, you could be writing this character for 20 books, it could be 3 books, you don't know.
We had a crime writing workshop here this morning with Alice Barkey. One of the things she was discussing was how a character has to change during the course of a book in order for there really to be a story, there has to be change. And so when you create a serial character, you've obviously got to change within the individual book, but you've also got to be thinking in terms of change across the whole sort of series arc, and that must be a challenge for you. So do you have books plotted out well ahead, or how far do you go? I
generally have about 3 books in the series in my head at any one time. Then there are all the other books that are also there. I tend to want to know where things are going, and I have a few storylines that go over a few books. But the thing with series fiction is that very often readers will read them out of order, and that's completely fine, and you know, that's how I've read lots of people, but it means that you have to be accessible in terms of the story. Yeah, and you have to sort of find a way of not putting in, well, then this happened, this is where we are, without making the obvious. You know, you can't just sort of say, okay, basically you've missed this. Here's the catch up. And also you can't move too far away from the character and why you came up with them in the first place. You know, you can develop them, but fundamentally they shouldn't change too much. I think you have to allow yourself some room to maneuver. When you get down to sorting out how the plot is going to develop, sometimes it's as you're writing that it comes to you that this should be this way. Sometimes I will launch into a book only having an image in my head of what's going to happen at the end and not really sure how necessarily I'm going to get there. But that's a bit scary. But, you know, my books, I write books for teenagers and books for adults. I write 2 books a year. And the adult books are 120,000 words. And so I think if you're going to throw yourself into writing 120,000 words without having at least a plan, you are asking for trouble. Unless you have unlimited time. If you have as many years as you like to do it, then you know, go in, fling yourself in, play around, do 20 drafts. If you have a deadline, then you need to know where you're going.
2 books a year is big pressure. I mean, to produce 120,000 books, I mean, most people would expect that to take a year to write without having to bolt in a children's book in your spare time.
Yeah, I probably write about 230,000 words a year. Published stuff.
Yeah, and do you find at this stage that it's coming out, it's quite polished when it hits the page, or?
Yeah, I think because of my background in publishing, I absolutely can't stand to leave a sentence that is just really badly, you know, put together or awkward or anything. So my first draft looks like a final draft. Even if it then goes through some big changes in the editing process, it always looks really finished and really correct and the rest of it, which is misleading for people because generally, I mean, the manuscripts that I used to get as an editor would have square brackets with must write something here or something like that. I can't do that. I just can't live with it.
It has to go out.
Each chapter has to make sense before I can move on to the next one, which is bad in one way because it takes me about 3 times as long to write the first 6 chapters as it does to write the rest of the book. That is no joke. It's pushing the rock up the hill and then it rolls down the other side, but you have to get it to the top of the hill
first. And find your way into the story.
Yeah, very much. Absolutely.
That's really interesting. So how many words would you write a day with that kind of?
Only about 1,500 roughly. And that some days I won't write 6,000, some days I might struggle. But I would, generally speaking, try and write 1,000 words. And if I haven't written 1,000 words, I would count that as a failure.
I'm trying to make that. And then would you edit that at the end of the day, or do you go into the next morning and go over what you've written and then?
I do it at the start of each writing session. I'll look back on what I wrote the previous time.
That's great.
Because I write in the evenings. I have 2 small children. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So I look after them during the day and then I write in the evenings.
And what time do you go to bed?
Whenever I can.
It's very interesting actually to talk to authors because so many people do have all these other things going on in their lives, and it's really something you do tend to try to fit in around. Even though you're a full-time author and that is your profession,
that's my job.
You still are finding time and.
But I always had this blissful idea that there would come a point in my life when I would just get to sit down and write, and that would be I would wake up in the morning and go into my office and sit down and work until I felt like stopping. And you read these kind of writers' accounts of their day, and it always sounds lovely and full of herbal tea and being relaxed, with long walks and everything. And I'm just thinking, my God, that is not the real world. And it's never going to happen for me. I was working full time. Then I went on, I didn't get to go on maternity leave. I had my first child early. Wrote my second book while he was a baby, tiny baby, and I had no sleep. It was just dreadful. And then, just fitted the rest of them in. But I think you need that pressure. You need something to get you to your desk and to make you sit down. And it's not just wanting to tell the story. It's not just the deadline. It's the combination of factors. So you are going to sit there until you've done your 1,000 words or whatever it is you need to do.
And just sort of for the people here who may be thinking about writing crime fiction, how would you be thinking in terms of sort of location is very important, obviously Maeve Kerrigan works because it's London, she's an Irish girl in London, so she's a sort of fish out of water. For anybody who's writing crime fiction, would there be any tips in terms of sort of location, character that you could throw out there?
Location is just a gift to a writer because it is you can do so much with it. If you set something somewhere like London, you almost have a shorthand for the reader because you say London and people immediately have an image in their heads, and even if it's just Big Ben, they have some kind of understanding of what you're talking about. If you set a book in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere, you can create that world. So you are in total control. Nobody has a preconceived idea. You tell them, you give them the setting. So you have a lot of control over what you're talking about. And if you think about some of the surprisingly successful books from the last 10 or 20 years, sometimes it's about the place as much as about the story. Like I think Captain Corelli's Mandolin is one, where this magical island of Catalonia was just incredibly appealing to people and actually added something to the story. So I think if you're writing crime fiction, the type of crime slightly dictates the place. And whether it's credible that something can happen somewhere and people will believe it. In my first book, I really wanted to set my first book in Ireland, and then I realised that because one aspect of it is that everybody basically has forgotten that this crime happened. Nobody really remembers. I thought, everybody remembers everything in Ireland. Nobody is going to forget that.
Nobody knows everybody,
and the minute you say the name, people say, oh, I remember that. But in England, it's such a churn of people move away. It's much more of a fluid society and much more closed society in the way that people, you don't necessarily ever have a conversation with your neighbours. You don't have to. Nobody would think that was weird if you'd never met your neighbours in London. So that was why it ended up there. So that's a case of the location was kind of dictated by the story.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Nice for anybody here who's writing. So I think it's time for us to wrap now. Thank you very much indeed, Jane Casey, for coming all the way from London to join us at Waterford Writers Weekend.